Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday to the Cyber Call, and we've got an awesome one today. And before we get on into it, looks like we're coming through loud and clear. If you could just confirm that for us. As always, we'll do a touch of banter, and then we'll get on into today's segment. So good to see Mike, Ann, and a bunch of folks out there, Miss Tina. Let me kick it off with this. Number one, Leron, I'm going to turn to you. Today we are going to be talking about specifically Keith's research, which is awesome. I was so glad to see this and so grateful for him to come on. We'll introduce him soon. One of the things, Leron, that you've been working on is a concept called loop engineering and heading up development over at SaaSalerts. Can you kind of walk people through that and why that's important for MSPs to understand how development teams should be looking at vulnerabilities and, potentially misconfigured code and things of that nature?
Sure. So when the whole AI coding thing started, it was initially code completion. So you would type stuff and it would tell you, I think this is what you want. And it'd say, oh, it's magical. Then we got into vibe coding where you could just type stuff and talk to it and it would do stuff for you. And now if you listen to Boris Cherny and I forget the creator of OpenClaw, they talk about this concept of loop engineering because the models have gotten to a point where the how is a lot less important than the what. And so you go in there and you say, this is the end state that I'm looking for, but it's an engineering end state, right? So you have to provide metrics and be as specific as you want. It's basically acceptance criteria. And you say, go and do this and don't come back to me until this thing is done. Now, that is like the future, right? Or this is what the best people in the world that are doing this are doing right now. So what I did was I took a YouTube transcript of Boris Cherny talking about this, fed it to Claude and said, hey, this sounds like a really good idea. I want to start doing this. Turn it into a skill for me. So then it turned it into a skill. And then when I go and I call my loop skill, it asks me a bunch of questions. It defines what the end state needs to look like. And then it just churns until it achieves the end state for you. So that's loop engineering at a very high level.
Very cool. Keith, does that resonate for you, when you think about, coding and how, and I don't know, again, I don't want to give away today's session, but when you thought about, developing the research for this?
Yeah, Andre Karpathy did a really great job pioneering a lot of this work. And so as part of the research, we do include what we call like an iterative approach. We had a few different modes that we looked at for patching. And one of the challenges, and that's, teasing a little bit of the research that's forthcoming is when we looked at this research and the results came out the way that, we discovered them, we realized like, oh no, like this is not a great place to lead the world right now, given how many vulnerabilities are being reported to both open source projects and private industry alike. So one of the follow-on pieces of research is going to be around, how many times through the loop does it take to actually produce what we call a scenario one successful patch outcome. There may be situations in which that loop could be potentially infinite, as we cover in the case study section of the research itself, where you never end up in a scenario where you actually get a successful vulnerability patched. But it's, yet to be seen as to exactly what that loop has to look like, what, percentage of correct instructions are required versus maybe just having no instructions being better in some instances. So, overall, we are looking very closely at this as like what's next, because we can't just, drop this research and be like, sorry, we're done. Like, you still need humans. Like, I don't think that's going to jive with a lot of people today.
Yeah, cool. Phyllis, crystal ball. I know version 9 will come out at some point. Will, some of the changes do you feel take this type of world of AI and patching we're living in into account?
I mean, I think it has to, right? It really is about, when you read the literature and you see, it is like the same controls, patching and things like that still stand. However, the prioritization is going to change and the frequency is going to change. And so, and how you measure success is going to change. And so we really have to look at the controls, look at the prioritization of patching, look at like how frequently do we think you need to patch? And then, what does that mean? How do you measure that? How is it when you go to measure your cybersecurity program, you're going to say, yes, we're patching properly, so on and so forth. I do want to do a plug as well. We have our Secure by Design paper, which, a couple years ago, that was a big push by the federal government. CISA has a Secure by Design pledge. And that we updated one time already in May. But it's, even though it's been updated, it's already a little bit behind. We updated it a lot because of AI and of course some things that we found that we made mistakes. But again, it's like, oh, we just had a meeting last week where we're like, it needs to be updated even more. The Secure by Design, and there are new findings. For example, we're talking about the what is it, loop programming, whatever you're calling it, and and it's kind of like, how often do we have to update? And, what can you write down that's going to stand the test of time and you don't look too outdated? And, it's that balance, with controls in particular, when it's kind of held up as a standard. You can't have a moving standard in which people are measuring themselves by. We pick on regulatory frameworks for being outdated at the same time. Once a regulatory framework changes and gets updated, the whole community pushes back and says, what? I just started doing this. I just am in compliance with this. And then you changed it. So there is that balance.
Well, thank goodness everybody, complies, with the, things like CVE, and there's no pushback in that area.
That's right.
And last comment here, as a, somebody that their solution plays heavily in patching, I'm curious, are you hearing, at least from your customer advisory board and or some of the bigger MSPs, wanting, I don't know whether it's more focus groups or how are they dealing with this, exponential rise and like a 500 to 600 patch Tuesday scenario? Or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think as with a lot of things with AI, right? Like it hasn't changed the fundamental challenge, but it sure as heck has made it a different scale, right? So I think Sal, our CEO, whenever he talks about patching, it's one of those things where as a vendor who provides, as part of the remote monitoring management, provides patching, it's one of those things that will never be done with. It's like building on sand; it's constantly changing, and so you're having to constantly invest in it and everything. I think that for me, whenever I think about the challenge for MSPs, it just goes through there's just so much noise, right? And some of these numbers, the fact that the vulnerabilities exist, it goes back to the people have tried to solve this in different ways of how do we prioritize, right? So this is why the known exploited vulnerabilities, the KEVs, right? Like, can we prioritize around that way? Are there different measures we can do that so we're not trying to basically play whack-a-mole and get all of these things at once? We see the patch Tuesday comes out and we are able to prioritize effectively. And so that's kind of where we've seen a lot of people asking for help, and where we focus some efforts is certainly you want to get to the point where it's able to patch what you need to patch more quickly, but also being able to get the right intel of saying, okay, this is going to help me actually read through the noise and prioritize to see what my systems are. And then, I mean, as always, it goes back to the fundamentals, right? You gotta be able to have visibility for what you want to secure. You have good network segmentation. You know what your most privileged devices and accounts are and everything, and you're segmenting those properly. You're treating them the right way, and you're prioritizing that way. So to me, a lot of this is not necessarily, while we should say, how do we patch all this tidal wave? It's more of like, well, how can we approach that through how can we make this tractionable by prioritizing better?
Yeah.
Actually, Andrew, I wanted to jump in on a statement that both Jonathan and Phyllis made, which is the question I like to ask. And I asked my own leadership this when we started kicking off agentic vulnerability discovery at 1Password, which is, what percentage of engineering time are you willing to commit to patching the vulnerabilities that we uncover as part of this process? I don't think there's not a single open source maintainer or boardroom that likes to answer that question, because the volume has been turned to 11 at this point.
I love the Spinal Tap reference. Leron, you and I spoke about this very thing last Thursday. Is that right? Like the amount of vulnerabilities you're dealing with versus a year or two ago?
Yeah, it has increased exponentially, like quite literally. We used to see 30, 20 per month. Now it's like 1,000, 2,000. It is crazy, the increase, and we have to deal with it. And our answer is, we have a person on the team whose full-time job it is to just sit there and hammer away at this. But at this point, as Keith just said, you want it down to 0? Great. Get me 6 more engineers.
Exactly. I guess so. There's Keith, a little bit of the quote unquote the rub of, oh, AI is going to just obliterate jobs, especially on the coding side. Well, maybe you can do a lot more coding with fewer, devs, but on the QA side and the vol side, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we might see like with every technology boom, right? Jobs go away, but then we've always seen this increase in jobs, and everybody's like, "Oh, AI is going to be different." Is it?
I mean, I think both between the research that we've published as well as research coming out of Veracode and others, we're working with the University of Alabama's High Performance Computing Center as well to do some tests, basically, or what are they called now? There's an M. Anyway, I can't remember the name. I'll come back to it. But we're doing some runs right now just to determine, like, what does the scale look like in terms of reproduction rate of vulnerabilities over time, given what we know from Veracode's research earlier this year, as well as our own research. And effectively, their runs currently show that we have an exponential runaway of vulnerabilities being introduced by AI in all likelihood, at least given current research and numbers that we've seen. So I think it's a really great job description for security professionals who are going to have to sit there and address these problems. So for those watching and those of you here on the call, it's a good time to be in security, but maybe not so much in other areas of tech today.
Yeah. Well, it's a perfect segue, because you mentioned like this runaway and vulnerabilities. And Keith, how I came across your name is I'm a big fan, follower, and one of our keynote speakers at Writer Boom 2027 is Chris Hughes. And when Chris Hughes calls out an article and, says, hey, you should read this. This is awesome research. And, I always do. And which is how I came across your work. So phenomenal job on it. I'll make sure I post the URL shortly. I'll make sure I post your LinkedIn as well. But kicking it off, before I let you take the stage and do a quick intro, this is in my opinion, one of the most timely and topical cyber calls we've done in a long time, because we've heard all about Mythos, right? And, what those tools are doing and, how to build a mission. They came out right away, Gotti and all the team that came around that and, published, securing it in the Mythos world. And then, obviously the exponential rise in vulnerabilities that we're talking about, then, there hadn't been any research, Keith, that I've seen that goes, hey, wait a minute, what's the kind of credibility or the usability, if you will, of these patches? And I know I'm searching for a word, it's not coming to me, I apologize, but you really at a high level, that was the thesis, which I'm going to let you talk about momentarily. So love the stuff you did. Welcome to the Cyber Call for our first time, and congrats on kicking off 1Password's threat research team. So Keith, tell us a little about yourself, what you're doing, and I'll hand the questions over to Phyllis.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So I'm Keith Hoodlet, Director of Security Research and Head of Off by One Labs at 1Password. We are a very small but mighty team. So there's 4 plus me doing the research. And to your point, Andrew, around Mythos, earlier this year, right around May the 20th or so is when we actually kicked off this research. And the team, thankfully, Axel and Spencer joined on May the 13th. Formerly, all 3 of us from Trail of Bits, where I was the AIML and AppSec director. So we joined 1Passwords for its new security research team. And Mythos was on everyone's mind. You know, the wave of vulnerabilities, or tsunami, as some people are calling it, was one of those things that I think all of us were pretty concerned about. And given some of the research from Veracode, where they just had their spring update on GenAI code security and the introduction of vulnerabilities as sort of a consistent 50-ish% rate for net new code in their study, we asked the question, well, what about patching? Like, it's not whole cloth new functionality, so maybe it will do better, is the sort of high level hypothesis. We initially hypothesized a 67% success rate in patching vulnerabilities, and we found that it was not nearly that good, high level. I'll pause there. I'm happy to go into the research a bit, but I just want to make sure we're pausing for any questions that maybe have come through.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll turn to Phyllis and the team, and they're going to ask you those questions and then get ready. And then I think it'll all come out. Feel free to riff too, Keith. If one of the questions is like, well, you know, I want to kind of touch on this and the research as well. So as somebody that obviously deals with a lot of research, Phyllis, with the Verizon DBIR, this is kind of right up your alley. And before I just say, Phyllis, take it away. Keith, I thought you were going to say when you said there's Axel and you got the band back together, I thought you were going to talk about Axel Rose. I was getting quitty, but I never knew he was into the whole cyber thing.
It's sort of like Taylor Swift, right? Like there's the Swift on security persona. Who knew, right?
Yeah. All right, Phyllis, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say kudos, because so often we always say, oh, the criminals really know how to organize around new tech. And, you know, the defenders are always slow. Why are we so slow? So like, you know, you're a little bit forward leaning where you're like, okay, let's use this tech for defense and let's see how viable it really is. And, you know, this research is one of the first ones out of the gate. So we appreciate that. So you named your research FLAWED, FLAWED. And, you know, tell us what that stands for and what inspired you to come up with that acronym.
So that's kudos to Spencer Michaels on my team. So initially when we ran the research, looking for a success rate of patching vulnerabilities using, at the time, frontier large language models that are widely available, so ChatGPT 5.5, as well as Claude Opus 4.8, both with their cyber verification program, Trusted Access for Cyber Guardrails. Spencer's really good with acronyms. And so he said, we should name this Fix-like Artifacts with Embedded Defects, or FLAWED. And turns out he was right in terms of the way that we saw our results, because quite a number of the patches generated as part of the process that we put together with our tooling of the same name generated flawed outcomes.
Right. So can you tell us about the methodology you used for your research? You know, you'll read about there's 6,080 patches, which is a lot of patches that, you know, you all came up with. And so how long did that take? Number one, you know, the methodology, and then actually, you know, all those patches.
Sure. So, I mean, there were a lot of vulnerabilities in there too, Phyllis. But team started research on May the 20th. We used mostly Claude Opus 4.8 to develop the tooling with some specific design parameters behind it. But what we wanted to do with the research as part of our methodology was to look at vulnerabilities that were unlikely to be part of the training data sets that already existed within the large language models. We wanted to avoid situations of memorization and recreation, which seems to show up quite a lot in a lot of the benchmarks and other studies looking at large language model performance. So we looked at a number of them, including copy fail. There was an ActiveMQ, XIM, Spring AI, Gemini CLI, and Chrome file system related vulnerabilities, all of which were, I think, CVSS 8 or 9 and higher, and all of which required a complex patch, which usually meant multifunction or multi-file. And the reason we chose these vulnerabilities is because we wanted to create as close of a public representation for what many companies are likely to have in their own business when patching vulnerabilities. They're code bases that aren't part of the training data set. They're likely to be multi-file or multifunction patches required. The criticality may not be the same, but I think for large portions of enterprise businesses, the representativeness is there. And we released also the tooling so that people can go and follow along with this methodology itself. But what we did is then we applied what we called 3 different modes and 9 different prompt types, because we wanted to give a sort of wide state representativeness for what this would look like from the various implementations that you might see inside of governments or inside of small businesses that are constraining their models, unlike perhaps some of the frontier labs. And so the modes themselves, I'm just actually trying to find it really quickly here in the paper, but we looked at a few different ways that you might consider patching. So the modes would include one shot, which is like just go create a patch, like, come back when you have the patch. You don't have to worry about iterating or looping through it. It's just give me a patch and get a patch. And it's the sort of thing that you might have in a locked down environment. Maybe you're a government entity and you don't want this thing touching the internet, or at least touching anything beyond the scope of the APIs that it's interfacing with. We also, to Laurent's point earlier, have an iterative mode, which is intended to loop through the process of creating a patch. And the AI can go ahead and basically determine, like, am I done? No, keep going, keep a memory file so that it can sort of learn from itself in the process. And the last one we called an exploratory mode. I sort of think of it like Nicholas Carolini's Go Find Me a Vuln example from UnpromptedCon earlier this year. But in this case, it's like, go create me a patch and you can determine what success looks like and just come back with a patch. And then from those modes, so each mode ran 20 of each prompt that I'm about to give you. So total 540 patches created from 3 modes, 9 prompts, 27 different combinations times 20 iterations or 20 runs per combination. But the default prompt is effectively hindsight. We call it default, but it's as if you were giving it perfect information. So you have the patch direction, the APIs that need to be patched, the locations of where the patch needs to be applied to, information about the vulnerability primitive and how it's exploited, et cetera. So it's effectively like, if the person that you've given the vulnerability to is a human engineer and they actually have really deep domain expertise, this is maybe the prompt that they would create, or that they themselves would then know where to go apply the fix. We also looked at everything else that people would look for, like static analysis tools as an output for, hey, here's your vulnerability, here's what you need to know about it, et cetera. We gave 2 kinds of AppSec engineer perspectives. The first is a prescriptive and correct perspective, which is like the engineer understands what the vulnerability is, how it's exploited, and how to fix it in the code, like the correct way. But as we know, many businesses have perhaps junior talent or may not be familiar with all different categories of vulnerabilities. So we also have an AppSec prescriptive that's incorrect. Like, it gives information that is sort of right, but some of it is wrong. Which had really meaningful impacts on the outcomes of patch success rates at the end. Then we gave a few more. So Bug Bounty Hunter, which is, again, just a proof of concept, high level vulnerability information, doesn't really know what the code looks like. An Embargo, which is like an open source project that is trying to give a patch, but do so in a sort of like clandestine way so that you don't really know it's vulnerable until the patch is widely distributed. And then we have the raw POC crash dump, as well as the dev who's walking through the code and says, this looks like a vulnerability. Can you just please go patch this? And then the last one, which is, I think, very representative of what people are trying to do today, which is an AI agent discovers the vulnerability. So I think some of the most represented prompt types were that AI agent discovery, as well as perhaps like the AppSec prescriptive and wrong, because let's face it, perfect information is not something that humans are consistently good at. We're also non-deterministic. So in total, just to wrap on this for methodology, ChatGPT 5.5 with Trusted Access for Cyber, and Cloud Opus 4.8 with Cyber Verification Program Guardrails, 3 different modes, 9 different prompt types. That sort of mode and prompt is considered like a campaign, and you have 20 runs per campaign, or per iteration, excuse me. And so at the end of the day, you end up with 540 patches from Claude, 540 patches from ChatGPT for each vulnerability. So in total, each vulnerability had 1,080 patches. Now, for those that can do math, you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, that adds to more than 6,080 patches. The answer is you're absolutely right. I'm quoting Claude on that one. Because in this case, there were about 400 runs that we observed where the large language model, and I'm using this term not derogatorily, but in the way that labs talk about this, is they cheated. They went and looked for the upstream answer to the vulnerability that they were trying to patch. And in those 400 instances where they provided a patch, it was a clean patch. Of course it was, because they were just copying the patch that they were trying to benchmark against. So we removed those from the final data set for reporting.
Keith, can I ask a quick question? And
yeah,
I'd love your thoughts, and Leron as well. I mean, does where we're at now, in essence, kill bug bounty hunters to a degree? I mean, is it like, because things are moving, like even as 1Password or Leron, and I can ask Jonathan the same, three companies that produce, some awesome software. You guys got to, by the time someone submits something, you guys are light years ahead of it. I mean, they might say, hey, I found this. I mean, the way correct me if I'm wrong, if you got a good dev team, I mean, we've already patched that and are thinking about something else by the time that even gets through our cycle, unless it's something crazy. Or am I completely smoking something, which probably isn't a bad idea these days?
I'll jump in first, and Leron, I'd love to get your answer as well. So I'm of 2 minds on this. I think with the volume of code being introduced and software being created, bug bounty becomes something that companies need, because many companies just don't have the security expertise or talent to be able to run these things successfully in their own businesses, at least at scale. I mean, unless you're below the security poverty line, quoting Wendy Nather there. Like, if you're below the security poverty line, you need it. It's just, you're not going to be able to get away from bug bounty. But the other side of it is, I think that bug bounty at speed and scale becomes unaffordable for most companies, because there's just too much code being generated too quickly and too many vulnerabilities being introduced too fast to be able to meaningfully keep on top of, let alone pay all the bounty hunters. So I don't know. It's Leron, please take it away.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think the old way of doing, the way that I look at this entire thing, right, is we've all been riding horses, and all of a sudden we now have spaceships, and it's like, go figure it out. So the rules of the game have completely changed. Don't give me a CVE that I can use Fable and come up with today. So I think for a bug bounty, a good one, you basically tell them, look, these are the things that I'm doing today. So don't bring me any of this like Bush League stuff. The only stuff I want you to bring me is stuff that is not going to get caught by any sort of scanner or normalized sort of tool. And we know, right? Because like in the beginning of this, these models break out of sandboxes and go hack into things they're not supposed to. Like, that's the sort of thing that I want you to bring to me if you're doing a bug bounty for me, is bring me the novel attacks that only you as a human engineer that is steering a spaceship, not just throwing 1,000 horses at this and then bringing me back 1,000 horses. Too many metaphors there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Phyllis, you guys obviously know Microsoft well, and the amount of patch Tuesday, things that are coming out of Patch Tuesday. Do you think if you're at the MSRC, that it's almost untenable to respond at this point to security researchers submitting things? And then, I mean, if you're patching 600, you can only imagine how many might be coming in.
Exactly. And that's where prioritization really comes into play. I mean, you really need to understand quickly what do I need to do first? And when you're a big company like Microsoft and you're getting all this information in, I mean, I don't know, maybe you're using AI to filter everything out, I mean, there's, it's kind of like when you have so many resumes and you're using AI to filter out all the resumes and college applications and all those things. And I think also, we still are humans and they're trusted people, and those kind of contributors always get pushed up to the top, I believe. That's kind of like the thing with, I will talk about just ISACs in general and people wanting to share vulnerability information and things like that. You've got I'll just say tier 1 people who you always trust. And so you're like, oh, you've got the reputation. I know you're good. I'm pretty sure the signature you're providing is good. And then it's like, oh, Phyllis is new. We're going to vet her stuff. Do you know what I mean? So you kind of have to have that prioritization. I don't know if MSRC does that, but I know a lot of organizations do that, where they're kind of like a clearinghouse for vulnerabilities and disseminating that data.
That's fair.
What's interesting too, really quick on that, there was a reported shield break 0 day, or a 0 day called shield break in Microsoft Defender, where Microsoft has very publicly come out and said that they are using AI to generate patches for vulnerabilities being reported to them, given the volume that they're dealing with. And lining perfectly with our research, there was a patch to Microsoft Defender where the attackers were able to actually bypass that patch and gain system level access on Windows boxes, which, I do not know necessarily how much a human is in the loop with some of the Microsoft AI generated patching, but it just so happened to line up quite perfectly with our findings from our research as a result. So it's like, yikes.
Keith, I want to throw one other one by you. Jonathan, did I cut you off there, dude?
Yeah, well, no, I just had a kind of going off that, Keith. Stepping back and looking at the research, which was really phenomenal to read and everything. And kudos to you for going out there and publishing it and sharing all this, not just doing it, but actually disseminating it. But stepping back to think, okay, what are the actual implications here, and what is being suggested? Because you look at these bigger projects with Anthropic. It's Project Glasswing, and then OpenAI with Daybreak, them having a little bit of different focuses between partnering with large organizations that provide software to a ton of different companies, and then the open source components of it, where cue the XKCD meme with like the infrastructure of the internet and the one tiny non-maintained piece of it. I mean, in terms of utilizing AI to develop patches, I guess just like making sure we're all clear and on the same page. Is the research meant to help other software vendors basically go through this challenge, or like looking at the open source side of it, helping other people go to those maintainers that don't have the resources available? Hey, we're actually going to take on the patching for you. Or are you saying like, hey, like, just as all of us are becoming vibe coders and developing our own software, we can start developing our own patching too, because that goes down a whole nother road.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of trust but verify, right? And if you look at, for example, we have the case study section of our research paper where we actually look at some of the patches that came out of Project Daybreak, specifically one of the partners for this Patch the Planet initiative from my former employer, Trail of Bits. Which we weren't aware that this was going to even be happening when we started our research. It came out about a month after our research had already got underway. And we looked very specifically at patches that they said basically, hey, we are going to let open source projects sign up with us. We're going to help uncover vulnerabilities, and then we're going to show up with the patch, which I think is laudable, right? It's, I think, a very positive thing for someone like my former employer to be doing. But given the state of our research and the findings that we produced, we went and started looking at the week 1 patch data set provided to these open source projects. There were 65 total patches, about 40 of them were security patches, and 37 of those 40 were what we would consider complex patches or touching multiple files. And the outcomes in terms of percentage breakdowns from the Patch the Planet initiative versus what we did with our own research were only within about 5% of a difference in outcomes. So not good is maybe the long and short of it. But in the case study that we produced with Free Nginx, where there was a vulnerability we went and studied, what was very interesting about that was Trail of Bits showed up with a patch for the vulnerability that they disclosed. The maintainer actually declined that patch and went and produced their own patch. Now, very quickly, I'll describe the scenarios we looked at, and then I'll sort of go into what happened. So scenario one, as we call it, is the best case outcome, right? It's the successfully patches the vulnerability and does not change the application's behavior. So that's S1 in our notation. Scenario two was that it does patch the vulnerability, but it alters the application's behavior in the process. So maybe an allow list becomes a deny list, for example, which can lead to other implications for the way that the code actually works. Scenario three was that it does not patch the vulnerability. I sort of give the analogy of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, the code still operates the same way as it did before, and it's still vulnerable. Scenario four was that it patches the vulnerability by adding a new one, which is not great. And then scenario five was that it does not patch the vulnerability and it adds a new one. And so when you looked at the patch provided by Trail of Bits for that particular one in the case study, that was a scenario five, does not patch the vulnerability as reported and adds a new vulnerability patch. And thankfully that was declined by the maintainers of Nginx. But the Nginx maintainers created a patch that was the scenario four patch, which was it patched the vulnerability by adding a new one, which we disclosed and they've since fixed. So we thought that was very interesting, and we actually ran it through the tooling that we've released open source, and there is a data set available that people can go and download and go and look at all those patches for this particular scenario. But with ChatGPT 5.5, we give it just 270 runs instead of the full 540. And it was very interesting that all of the vulnerability patches from that set were either the patches vulnerability by adding a new one, scenario 4, or does not patch vulnerability and adds a new one, scenario 5, outcome. So it was just like this is a scenario in which if you're a company and you're thinking, okay, I want to apply AI to patch vulnerabilities in my code base, the best thing that they can do today is take vulnerabilities that they've already patched and they know are successful patches, run it through the flawed tooling that we've released with like a checkout just before the patch was released and see how successful an AI might be at producing patches as desirable outcomes. Because some areas in the code base might be an entirely unsuccessful area in which they can apply a patch. And we've seen that with some of the companies that 1Password has acquired, where we went back over the last 12 to 18 months on vulnerabilities that were successfully patched. And we've also seen 0% successful patch outcomes from our tooling. So it sort of makes you wonder, like, is it the code base? Is it the language? Is it the framework that they're using? Is it this particular vulnerability? So those are all things that we're very curious to learn more about.
So I have a question, maybe because we just, thinking about secure by design, but, you also have to run your patches regardless of who writes it, AI, human, combo of both. You have to run it through your secure by design best practices, right? You have to go, you have to look, you have to check the whatever, your normal code checking, and maybe it's enhanced by AI. You should still be doing that. Did you take that into consideration for your scenarios?
Yeah. So, and if you think about it as well, right, Phyllis, for the vulnerabilities that are new and reported, like up until that moment, all of the tests that you've been running, all of the validation that you've been performing has been passing. And so if you patch the vulnerability, like it's possible that maybe the tests will still pass. Maybe you need more or new tests. And I think to the point that you're driving toward, that I think is a really strong example of what good secure design outcomes can produce is you go back to, I think it was maybe March or April, when Firefox released a pretty big patch set, something like 200 plus patches. But they talked about in that same release how there were a very large hundreds of vulnerabilities that did not need to be patched because of the design and architecture of the software that prevented those from ever becoming exploitable. And so I think we're actually now in a world where secure by design, like we've been talking about it for more than a decade, but it actually really matters now in ways that I think a lot of companies that are new can benefit from, and a lot of companies that have been kicking the proverbial technical debt can down the road now have to go and consider how they do these major rewrites. And then we have to consider like maybe AI can help with the rewrite, but then we look at things like Vericode's recent research, and you may be doing a rewrite that either reintroduces previously patched vulnerabilities just because you're changing the framework. And so like the common way to do something is now a vulnerable way of doing something. And it creates, I think, more questions than answers for a lot of businesses. But all that is to say, a lot of the times that you're looking at a code base, the locks and unlocks of a database being a really great example, those were intentionally designed to operate that way in order to prevent certain negative outcomes from occurring when writing to or reading from a database. Those might get lost in a rewrite. And so that scar tissue, as we call it, from like a patching perspective over long running or long existing code bases, you have to be very careful to ensure that all of those things also transfer over in secure by design rewrites, because sometimes they don't. And that opens up previously patched vulnerabilities in a new way.
So Phyllis, I'm gonna segue to Leron, but as I do, just so he can get a few and Jonathan can get a few in. Keith, as I segue over, is it potentially I don't know, what comes to mind is all of the, VPN ongoing constant, patch exploitation, patch, and it's many vendors. There's not one here, as we know. Do you think scenario 4 played a role in that? Like, if you could go back in time and start studying those patches, and maybe I don't know if that's part of the research on that you might consider, but it just seemed like pick a vendor, the firewall vendors, that it was just this constant scenario. Is there any potential thought? Am I barking up the wrong tree?
No, I think your mind is in the right place. I don't know, for how long they've been using AI to potentially patch vulnerabilities in those particular businesses is sort of undetermined. And a lot of the vulnerabilities, if you think about it, are probably quite old. And so I do want to get Leron and Jonathan's thoughts on this. But the way that I explain this challenge right now for like vulnerability discovery, more than anything, I think that what we're seeing, Andrew, is just the volume of discovery has increased. Where previously, as a threat actor or an actual attacker, it's sort of like a pack of wolves. There are only so many farms and so many sheep that you could attack and consume at once,
right?
And still, profit from. Now we're at a point where it's like those wolves are almost everywhere, and they're attacking almost everybody all at once. And so their ability to go after the Cisco's, Fortinets, F5s, what have you, of the world, and Ivanti, and tear them up is, I think, more of a because they can, not because they weren't vulnerable before and now they're vulnerable because they're patching with AI. That is more likely to be, I think, true. And quite frankly, for those businesses, C and C++ code bases, which I'm sure many of them are still operating within for that hardware, is complex. As my university professor would say, C is for the brave. He wasn't wrong. But also with very large, complex code bases existing for tens or dozens of years, you're going to eventually create landmines that you never even thought of, that the people who wrote it are no longer with the business and haven't been for a decade or more. Here we are.
All right, Leron, over to you, because I know you have no tech debt ever. So we'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, it comes down to, right, similar to the question that Keith asked before, which is how much engineering time are we willing to dedicate to cleaning up tech debt? And unfortunately, in some organizations, it's absolutely zero. We want more bells and whistles. Give us nothing but more bells and whistles. And so you end up with a ranch house that now has 36 different bedrooms, bathrooms, that just... right? Like the septic system is hacked on, like nothing really works, because if you're going to expand, from a ranch and you want to turn it into the Empire State Building, there's a whole lot of different things that need to happen in order to make that work. But sometimes the business folks don't want to hear that, like, hey, like, we got to tear down the old thing, put down a new foundation, steel, all that stuff that we need to do. Like, they're not really interested in making any of this happen. But I do think that the people that are typically doing the vulnerability assessments, right, they're kind of used to looking at a vulnerability and then addressing that vulnerability, where now you need sort of somebody with an architect mindset that also has that skill set of actually attacking the vulnerability. And I call it engineering the engineering process, right? So this is an incredibly interesting problem to me. And that is, okay, so if we give an LLM and say, like, go fix this, it's only going to get it right like 26% of the time. That's a major problem. Okay, well, how do I fix that? Well, I kind of have this concept of loop engineering, so I'm going to loop through it. But something that we want to just be able to tell a model, go fix this, and expect perfection coming out of the gate. And they just don't have that. They're not there yet. I think eventually we'll get there. But the way to do it today is go around the CVE scan again and again. And then an adversarial model, go do the exact same thing. And then have another model introduce brand new threats and attack what you just did from an angle that we haven't considered before. And the human absolutely needs to stay in the loop, because in my organization, like, I don't want to hear, Andrew, like, you send me an email and it's absolute crap. And I'm like, Andrew, this is absolute crap. And you're like, oh, well, my agent wrote it. Like, oh, like, that doesn't absolve you, right? You're still ultimately responsible. The tool sets have changed, but you're still ultimately responsible. And so humans absolutely stay in the loop. They do their code reviews and they make sure that they're not shipping a scenario 2 through 5. I'm only interested in scenario 1s. When you get those out the door, that's your job. But if you're engineering the engineering process, you should have an AI code review, and it does it. And then you do a human code review and you're like, oh, you missed all this stuff. How could you? Guess what? Teach your AI code review what it just missed, so that the next time it does it, it catches those again. Is it going to be perfect? No, but it's substantially more efficient than just the human code review by itself. And that, to me, is how I think about the entire loop engineering cycle applied in this field.
Very cool. Well, let me have you ask, Jonathan, do you want to mention something, bud?
Oh, I just wanted to ask Keith if the research, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is an implication of this that a lot of the patches that we're seeing rolling out actually hitting that scenario 2 to 5 or 2 to 6, and we don't really know about it. I mean, is that the implication here?
Yeah, like
short answer is yes.
Right, Keith?
I mean, yeah. Short answer, Jonathan, is yes. Long answer is we're going to go look at receipts. So my team is actively looking at the rest of the Patch the Planet vulnerabilities, which purportedly have human review in the loop, and hopefully are doing the same sort of things that Leon is describing. And hopefully that means that we see better outcomes than what we saw from the week 1 patch data set. So more to come on that. But my worry, and part of the reason that Andrew, to your point earlier, I pushed very hard, and thankfully my leadership were very supportive of getting the blog, plus the research paper, plus the tooling, plus all of the data set. You can go look at all 6,480 plus patches if you want to, from the work that we've done, because the implications of it, Jonathan, are pretty scary when you see Microsoft and Google, and I think Amazon as well, but certainly Microsoft and Google and others have all said that they are pushing out AI-generated patches. And it may mean, at least based on the Monte Carlo simulations, that's the word I was looking for earlier, from the High Performance Computing Center at University of Alabama, at least based on the numbers they've run so far, they've shown that you can throw infinite compute and infinite number of iterations and models at this problem, and you still have bugs and vulnerabilities that need to get patched as an outcome. So hopefully we can turn the corner on it, but at least right now we're going and looking at real world examples that are in the open source ecosystem to determine, like, is this actually happening at the level that we think it is? And so far from the week 1 data set, the short answer is yes. The long answer is to be determined.
Oh man. So I mean, also, if I'm getting this right too, like, not only if I'm an MSP or an IT professional and I've got, it's Patch Tuesday, there's 6,000 new vulnerabilities. I patched them. Now I'm supposed to, like, also go back and double check the homework and make sure that it was actually doing what it said it was doing.
I mean, if you're getting patches from upstream vendors, you sort of have to trust that they've done the homework, and all you can really do is patch and pray a little bit. And hopefully, the lessons learned from the businesses as a result of this, making it into media and being, reported pretty widely, will lead to these businesses stopping and applying that human in the loop. To Liran's point, like, you own the outcome of the thing that you agreed to merge into the code base, right? Like, that is, I think, something that we need to continue to hold people accountable for. But the real risk is the tidal wave of vulnerabilities that are falling into, excuse my cat, are falling into the laps of researchers and of security teams.
I was wondering if that was my cat for the record too.
But all that is to say, there's a lot, and there's only a certain level of vulnerabilities that humans can actually review, patches for on a given day, and you're going to overrun them. And I think they already have been overrun. So now we have to come back to, I think, Phyllis, as you were pointing out earlier, prioritization really matters. Like, what's our threat model? What are the things that have the greatest impact to us as a business? And as Daniel Miessler actually said as well, many companies are going to benefit from, quote unquote, going dark, right? No more work in the open source space, no more contributions to open source projects. Dan Lawrence, or Laurent, I always forget how to pronounce his name, from ChainGuard, basically wrote in his blog post, The Hardest Fork, that, like, open source is dead potentially as we know it, and we just don't know it yet. And that has, I think, a lot of really meaningful and not great implications for businesses the world over if we go to, like, truly closed source custom code bases for everybody going forward.
Yeah, I mean, because Chip talks a lot. Chip Buck, one of the founders of SaaS Alerts, Liran, he talks a lot about the importance of open source and keeping things in a, there was a certain importance to that whole thing and keeping code safe. I mean, are we almost like in this perfect storm, bud, because of that?
I mean, I choose to be optimistic here and say the community, like, if Microsoft is using a library, some giant companies using a library that's maintained by 2 part-time guys, go in there and, like, you take ownership of fixing it for the community as a whole. So that crowdsourcing motion, I think, also has the potential to fix it. But then again, if you're doing, like, I don't know, nuclear missile weapon systems, then maybe it does make sense to hard fork at that point and kind of keep your own thing. But I think for the majority of folks, I would like to see the open source system come together here and do the types of things that we're talking about here to secure things for all of us.
Well, and then, like, Keith, what you provided to help with tooling and everything, I think is a great step for that. And not just for scanning, seeing, did it solve it the way we thought it did? It's not introducing new vulnerabilities, but also addressing the potential impact on things. I mean, I wonder if there's a way to give people more access to being able to test that sort of thing, because that's something we see a lot too, is with our customers, whenever patches do roll out. I mean, we've got and one way we're utilizing AI is with a patch intelligence feed, where it's saying, here's all the sources that are saying this patch is actually flawed and so it's causing some issues on these systems. So you can kind of get some more insight that way. But that's a whole other side of it, is what is this patch actually going to do? What are the unintended consequences?
Is there, Keith, are you familiar at all with Sunil Yu's work at all, the Cyber Defense Matrix? And he just rolled out the AI Defense Matrix. And he talks a lot about mental models. And do you feel, that's a leading question, is there the ability with your research to come up with some type of model, whether, depending on who you are, you're a developer, you're an MSP, you're whatever. Certainly from our world, MSPs, as I think Jonathan posed this, you patch, like, is there kind of a mental model we're going to have to go through, and prioritization and just, is there something there that you're thinking about or is across your mind of how this is going to have to work?
Yeah, shout out to Sunil and all the work that he's done and all the things he's made public. To Liron's point earlier, I think in many ways for many businesses, it's going to come back to needing to probably throw more tokens at the problem, which makes, I think, the labs very happy from the Frontier AI Lab side. But just because you've patched doesn't mean you shouldn't still try to hit it with, Raptor as like a harness, just as one public example. We will eventually be publishing our own vulnerability discovery harness as well. We're currently in the process of disclosure with the Linux kernel and some other high profile targets that we found some stuff in. But all that is to say, I think the analogy that I like to use, or perhaps close with, just looking at the time for folks, is in medieval times, when your kingdom was being invaded by Vikings, many times they'd slash and burn the wheat fields so that the invading army couldn't feed themselves off of the wheat that was still growing. And if you were the neighboring kingdom, you didn't care because you'd still go and pull the wheat from your fields on a normal timeline because you weren't being invaded, your neighbor was. Well, similar to the wolf analogy earlier, the Viking army is invading everybody's wheat fields and kingdoms now, and slashing and burning your vulnerabilities inside your business or inside the open source ecosystem is, I think, the best thing that we can do to ensure that we continue to have secure and robust software in companies. And I think more than anything, what we're finding is the concept of many eyes make vulnerabilities shallow was not true until people started applying AI to the problem. And now we're finding all the vulnerabilities that have existed in some cases for years or decades that hopefully are being patched with some human in the loop review as opposed to just AI generated patches, because as our research shows, that's not working out so well for folks.
Yeah. Wow. That hour flew.
Yeah.
Holy cow, we could do a whole nother, right, Phyllis?
Yeah. I will say one thing. Back in the olden days, you all may be too young for this. When Microsoft first released their patches, they were pretty bad. I mean, they would break things. And back in the olden days, when Windows NT first came out, I was in charge of the agency of our small little Windows NT network. And then, we migrated or whatever. Anyway, so I remember the first time, doing Exchange and all those, and we had, I would wait 6 to 9 months before I patched a server, before Microsoft put out a big patch or a big service pack at the time, because it inevitably broke something. So I'm going to be like Lorana and try to be more optimistic that, there's a learning curve. Today we just would assume that a Microsoft patch is going to work,
Yeah.
Back in the olden days, we did not. Maybe we kind of go back to, okay, they're doing it this way. And maybe they've lost a little bit of trust in some instances. But, because of the public pressure, because of the scrutiny, hopefully they'll, have better practices when it comes to their patching with AI, using AI to create patches.
Yeah. Well, I know we're just about over in time. Keith, will you be, for example, at John Strand's Wild West Hackin' Fest or anything in the upcoming? And we'd love to have you at the Right of Boom. I'm going to be hitting your team hard to get you there. But where can we find you next? Or just online?
Yeah, so I believe we're going to be speaking at the I4 conference coming up from KPMG here in October. I'll be there personally. We also have some CFPs out to Offensive AI Con that we're waiting to hear back on, and always happy to talk more about other opportunities to discuss, meet in person, and share the research. So in the meantime, hope you all enjoy it. Hope you in the audience have had a chance to give it a read, or at least you might want to go give it a read. And yeah, stay tuned. We got more cooking, so got to get back to the kitchen.
Yeah, we'll keep pushing it out for you, Keith. It was a pleasure having you. Really appreciate you taking the time. Liron, thanks for being a special co-host. Jonathan, as always. Phyllis, wishing everybody out there, thank you for tuning in. Make it a great day.
If you're in the Right of Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.rightofboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.